It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. Take Command Podcast. It's Logan Paulsen. I'm Craig Hoffman. Happy to be with you on a Tuesday, a mailbag Tuesday, but also, Logan, the NFC Coaches Breakfast Tuesday. Yeah, you ever go to the owners' meetings? They ever send you those?
I've never been down there, but I was checking out Sam Fortier on Instagram yesterday, and it doesn't look like it's a bad spot to go. I'll tell you that.
No,
I mean,
it is
like right on the water. Looks nice.
Yeah. It's Anthony and I were joking about this on the radio show yesterday. It's like, you know, it's the hotels that you and I don't even know exist kind of place. Like, you know, oh, the Ritz-Carlton, that's not nice enough. Find me the Breakers, Palm Beach, or the Biltmore in Phoenix. And it's like, you just wander around this hotel that you're afraid to, like, you know, pull up a carpet string because it'll cost you $10,000. And there's executives and everybody walking around everywhere. Everyone's way more relaxed. Like yesterday, Adam Peters spoke, and it was the most relaxed, most verbose I feel like I've ever heard him. You legitimately have breakfast with the coaches, which is always great for radio. As the one person who really, really cares about the sound quality in the media, when I was back on the beat, is the only radio beat reporter. It's really great to have some of the most important sound bites of the offseason with clanking forks in the background. But it's a great time. So we're actually recording this Tuesday morning as DQ is wrapping up the coaches' breakfast. Adam Peters spoke yesterday. So we're going to talk a little bit about what they said, and then we're going to get into your mailbag questions per usual for our early week podcast. So I guess the big story, Logan, is confirmation on something from Dan Quinn yesterday or this morning, where he says that Brandon Coleman is going to play right tackle. I'm glad I read multiple folks on this because it's not he's going to play right tackle. It's he's going to move to the right side. We're going to start him at tackle, which is a very different thing than like he's our starting right tackle. Clearly, that is the A1 plan, and we're hoping that it works out. But it sounds like tackle first. Let's see if we can make him a really good right tackle. And if it doesn't work, then we'll kick him out into guard. And then you just got to wonder, like, how long is that leash? Is it Brandon Sheriff 2 days of camp long? Or is this hey, we're going to give it a couple weeks? And obviously we'll give it the spring, but in training camp, like how long does that leash ultimately wind up being?
Yeah, and I think obviously, like we've talked about this a lot with Brandon Coleman and Laramie Tunsil in conjunction with the Laramie Tunsil edition. But I do think, like, when you look at value, and I know people are looking at guard contract value at the moment, and they say, oh, well, guard and tackle are getting closer. Like, you just need to get 4 or 5 good guys and kind of figure it out from there. I still think when you just look at the landscape of the draft this year, the landscape of the draft last year, it's just hard to find tackles. And so if you can get somebody who can play right tackle in Brandon Coleman, again, who has the length, who has the athletic measurements and all the kind of testing numbers that would fit a tackle, I would just definitely give that a really strong look because, again, there's more value in it. It's harder to find guys to fill those roles. And so I think it's the right move. I think it's a smart move. But like you said, and I think it's something that we've kind of alluded to this whole time. Like, if it doesn't work out at tackle, I think he's good enough. I think he is an NFL offensive lineman. So whether that's him playing guard or playing, right tackle, I think that'll kind of shake out in the wash. But I do think ultimately, like, the thing to kind of take away is that you're going to get better at 2 spots with the Laramie Tunsil edition either way. And so, so I think that's, again, it's a little bit confirmation bias, a little bit kind of supporting things we'd kind of hypothesized. It's nice to hear Dan say that and kind of give us a direction for the rest of the offseason. But I think it's a good move.
Yeah, and it's not any different than what we'd expect considering, one things that Adam said yesterday about someone. I think he was talking about the tight end room. He's like, we just want a culture of competition. If Andrew Wiley's smoking Brandon Coleman in training camp, like, they'll find another spot for Coleman, especially right now with Cosme out. Like, there's an extra spot available, which was kind of funny because he was like, DQ was like, it's going to be on the right side. And it's like, well, if he doesn't work out at tackle and then all of a sudden Sam comes back at right guard, you'd imagine that Coleman's going to wind up playing left guard. But we'll see how that machination works out during the season. Maybe this is all for moot, and he really is going to be the right tackle because it works out just fine. It's not like he was terrible last year by any stretch of the imagination. Struggled a little bit late as he got hurt, but we'll see where that goes. The other positional news coming out of the coaches' breakfast this morning from DQ is new corner Jonathan Jones going to apparently play a little bit more inside. Mike Sainer still going to stay outside for right now. They're both going to cross-train at both positions. And obviously this could change if all of a sudden the best player available on their board at 29 is a corner and it's that outside guy, and they get someone who they think can play out there, I don't think they'll hesitate to move Mike Sanders still back inside. But as of right now, the base going into the draft is it sounds like Sanders still is going to cross train at both. Jonathan Jones going to cross train at both, but shade more inside. That means Sanders still would be shading outside. What do you make of that? Obviously, opposite of Marshawn Lattimore.
Yeah, I think that's kind of exactly at least what I thought was going to be happening, right? Like, Mikey did a great job last year. I think Jonathan Jones, is a really good football player that, again, to me, he just feels like the guy that can do anything. You know what I mean? He can kind of play outside if you need him to. He can back up in the slot. And so why not? Why not just have, kind of give Mikey his home? Jones can back up anything. You got Noah Benogany still on the roster, right? Like, he can play the nickel if you need to. Like, it's good it gives you more flexibility. Just like the same thing with the offensive line. It just lets you get your best 3-4 guys and dime out on the field, and I think that's awesome, And so obviously Jonathan Jones played predominantly outside last year, but he has played nickel in the past. So I think to me, it's just depends on who you think's the best player outside. And right now, I'd probably assume it's Mike Sanders still based on how he played last year. But again, it's still so early in the offseason. A lot of stuff still needs to happen. And I think this gives you a direction of what they're thinking right now. And it's so funny when you talk to fans or when I talk to players that I consult with, it's this is how they feel today. But when they get to camp, it might look totally different. When they get to OTAs, it might look totally different. And this might go in a completely different direction. And I think you just have to be ready as a fan base for that, but I think this is a good starting spot.
For sure. It was interesting, too, to hear DQ talk about the things that attracted them to Jones. Speed and tackling. He was very clear about those two things. And so, obviously, he's not probably as fast as he used to be. But this is a guy that ran low 4.3s when he came out. Yeah. He just came out a decade ago at this point. But still super fast. And the tackling is what you want in that nickel spot. So it makes a ton of sense for a guy who's going to have run support responsibilities. I thought Renner was so good with us last week when he talked about how, that nickel spot, you're kind of a linebacker in the run and a DB in the pass. And so you need someone who knows how to fit runs, who can make solid tackles in the run game. Not to mention the screen game is such a huge part of what so many teams do now. Can you get out there and be a sure tackler on the edge? So that sounds like what they're going to do with Jonathan Jones and Mike Sanders still. Last but not least, this was news from the Adam Peters side of the house yesterday. And not really news, but I thought just really good perspective. And I was kind of mad at myself, frankly, Logan, for not thinking of this sooner. But Adam was asked about using all these draft picks for trades. And he was, look, you got to take advantage of opportunities. A guy like Tunsil's not available very often. Same thing with Debo. I know him really well. Opportunity presented itself, and for the cost, it was a no-brainer for us. But the concern is that you don't get the cheap talent, if you will, that you get when you use your draft picks on actual young players in the draft, and you get the rookie contracts. Well, Peters reminded everybody that last year, Logan, they drafted 9 guys, and every single one of them made the team. And that's before you add Paulsen, Yankoff, and Tyler Owens, 2 undrafted free agents. So we're talking about 11 guys on rookie contracts in one season. And obviously, 7 rounds in the draft, you start with 7. You can always get the compensatory picks, whatever. But if you take that and say, hey, we need to average 21 picks over 3 years or 14 picks over 2 years, if you go this year, the 5 picks they have, 11 plus last year's, 11 last year, 5 this year, that's 16. They're ahead of schedule. 5 next year. Even if they don't make a move and recoup any more draft capital, they're still sitting at 21 over 3 years. And that's me adding on that, not Adam. But I think that's what he's insinuating is guys, relax. We're fine. What do you make of that reminder, if you will, and does it change at all? I know we've been fairly supportive of these trades. We like them just because that's our analysis, not because we're go team, pom-poms, yay.
Right.
But does that even, I guess, strengthen your support for this?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously, I do think that retaining draft capital, retaining cost-controlled assets is important, right? But I also think finding good football players is equally as important. And I think when you looked at the direction that this roster needed to go, the Laramie Tunsil trade specifically, had to happen. I don't know how else you would have done it. So for whatever the cost, whatever the kind of cap ramifications, to me, that doesn't even matter because you needed to get a player in at that position. And it wasn't going to happen in the draft, most likely. And it wasn't going to happen in free agency, just to get that cleared up here. I do think that, obviously the 11 rookies last year, the 5 and the 5, I think that kind of is a nice illustration of the direction this could go. But as you know, Craig, you've covered the NFL for a long time. it's those 11 guys, some of them might not make the team this year, right? Like there
Of
might be some
course.
turnover there, right? And I do think that Adam is aware of that. So I do think at 29 this year, like Mike Renner talked about, like trading out of that spot, recouping some draft capital this year, making sure you're locked in with your free agency stuff. I mean, the more draft study I do, the more I'm like, man, free agency, if you handle it right, or the UDFAs after the draft, like
Yeah.
it can be an absolute gold mine. So I think if you can mine those opportunities well, find good football players, they can do this in different ways. Like when I was in Atlanta, I remember they brought in like 20 or 17 undrafted free agents because they had 4 draft picks one year. And if you do that, if you handle that process appropriately, you can get good football players there too. So I think the point stands, right? I think it becomes a little bit more challenging now because you have less high draft capital to work with. But I also trust that Adam is acutely aware of that. I also know that next year we're going to have some coaches leave, right? We're going to get some compensatory picks. Players are going to leave. We're going to get some compensatory picks. So all of a sudden, this 5-5 is now maybe it's 6 this year with a trade back, and maybe it's 7 next year with some comp picks. So like to me,
Right.
it'll kind of work out in the wash. But I do think it's good perspective that Adam provided for sure.
For sure. It just shows that you're not nearly as far behind the 8 ball as some people would think because you've got 5 and 5. And the other reason that you want to, maybe trade back and get more sooner rather than later, it's not necessarily about just what you have on draft day. They can't make the Laramie Tunsil trade if they don't have all the picks that they've got. Like you've got to be able to make. And who says, by the way, that they don't trade someone, that they don't trade a Duran pick? Like what happens if they draft a DT? Walter Nolan falls to them, and he's the guy at 29, and all of a sudden they get to training camp, and someone else needs a defensive tackle, and they're like, "Hey, Duran Payne, you're in the final year of your deal. This team wants to give you an extension. We're going to make a trade." Now all of a sudden they get a second-round pick back for Duran Payne. Like that could happen. John Dotson got them a 3rd last year. So like these things can happen in training camp, in the middle of the season, in whenever. And again, like I haven't heard anything. That's just me spitballing an idea in terms of that. But the more capital you have sooner, you are then more maneuverable, especially to go up in the draft or to acquire another player via trade. And ultimately, the point is to get as many good football players as possible. Yes, you want to build through the draft because that is probably where you're going to get your best players, and that is the one risk that's still on the table here. But they've maintained their 1st and 2nd round picks throughout this. I guess did they give up a 2nd in 26 to Houston for Tunsil, but they could still get a 2nd back before then. So we'll see how that goes.
And I think to your point, just kind of like think about like what it means to actually have a GM that's like very competent at the job. Like all of a sudden, everything is on the table. There's none of this like, oh no, we're filed into 5 picks. Like they understand the restrictions that they've placed on themselves, and they understand also how to kind of get themselves out of those situations too. So I expect again, and they're always thinking about stuff. They're always thinking about trades. They're like just how dynamic the offseason was last year. How aggressive they were in certain spots, how aggressive they were this year. This is a different kind of ball of wax than I think Commanders fans are used to. And it's a dynamic front office. And it's people that are like, it's a playmaking front office is the thing I'm going to say. And I think keeping that in mind as you look at this, like this is not going to be the same thing next year. It's not going to be the same thing in 2 years. Like they're going to work to kind of, put themselves in the best situation to be successful, like you alluded to there. They're going to trade players. They're going to work comps. They're going to trade back in the draft. Like, even if you trade out of that 2nd round spot, just as a hypothetical, like you're going to recoup draft capital for that, even if you move a couple spots. So like, I expect them to leave the draft in this upcoming year, 2025, probably with 6 or 7 picks. Like they're going to find a way to get that done. So in terms of me being concerned about cost controlled assets, all that stuff, is it something to be aware of? Yes. But do I have the utmost confidence that they are also aware of it? Yes. And do they know how to rectify and fix some of these restrictions that they place on themselves? I think that's also emphatically yes. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm so excited for draft night is because I can't wait to see them kind of like work some magic and figure some stuff out.
Yeah, although I'm not that excited for draft night because I'm like, oh, they're just going to get to 29 and trade the pick, and it's going to be like midnight, and I'm going to want to go to bed, and I'm old,
true.
And that part of it is it's past my bedtime. Commanders, please keep picking past my bedtime. It is worth it. It is worth it for all the joy that it brings us during the season. And yeah, I just to wrap this up, like that is something I've learned from covering them, and also, frankly, the Wizards. The Wizards are a very dynamic front office that you are like, of course, how you write a particular season, like it's over when it's over. Like no matter what the Wizards do in the future, the 2024 season will have been terrible in the win-loss column. They stink. And they're doing that on purpose for a thing, and that's on a different show because this is the Commander show. But like, I've learned to understand how they operate, where it's like we acquire this second round pick or this late first so that we can trade up later. Like, it is a constantly moving equation that you can grade it as you go, but it's a good way to look foolish and wind up on cold takes exposed later because you are often grading something that is only halfway done. And Adam Peters operates in many ways the same way, where you might have it's chess. Like, you're thinking multiple moves ahead, and that is how this goes. Take Command, Logan Paulsen there, Craig Hoffman here, and it is mailbag time. And Logan, we're actually going to go callback style to the last mailbag. You talked about how you've taken some things. This feels actually very appropriate as they're getting ready to ban the tush push because in part it's a rugby play. But you talked about how you looked at combat sports, you looked at rugby, you looked at plenty of other sports to help train yourself and to train the guys that you train that are in the league. And so Tristan Gregory 2378 actually left a YouTube comment and said, can Logan expand on some of the things he's taken from rugby and adapted for football training? Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, there's two main things that I've taken. The number one most important thing is how they condition tackling. So like, and I think the NFL has like kind of looked at that model and said, like, how do we adapt, like, obviously safer tackling practices. So like when I was with the Falcons in 2017, they had rugby coaches come out and teach tackling, like, you know, kind of chasing the backside hip, how to gather, like staying square, like where my head, like mainly where my head should be. And then I think when you look at how rugby teams drill tackling, they do a lot of tackling on the bag, right? In the off season, like high off season. Like, I'm talking, it's 3 weeks removed from season. Like, they're doing bag work to tackle. And I thought, like, that's a really good way to do it because you're kind of reinforcing positions, you're reinforcing patterns, you're reinforcing contact, but you're doing it on the bag, right? And so you get your buddy to hold the bag, and they have this really like comprehensive system of teaching tackling. They have this really comprehensive system of executing tackling. So much like with the MMA stuff, I was like, that was a big inspiration for me for my current training to basically be like, hey, like, we can get tackling done earlier in the offseason. We just have to decrease the intensity because the position, the spacing, the timing is all relevant. We just decrease the intensity of it, and finding ways to decrease that intensity. Like, rugby's got a really excellent roadmap of that. And so then the other thing schematically that I really enjoy in watching in rugby is their ability to utilize the lateral. So I'm always kind of thinking, you know, when I coach high school football, for example, is there a way to bring this to the forefront of that? And that's essentially what triple option football is, right? It's essentially a rugby play, right? You're trying to get a 2-on-1 at some point on the
Don't
perimeter.
say that, Logan. They'll ban it.
But and I think that's another kind of, again, the more my son plays rugby, the more I watch rugby, the more the tush push is so anti-rugby. Anything you do in rugby, it's crazy. Like in a scrum, like you fit up and you're like locked in, and there's like a very specific timing and everything to it. Like the tush push is a football play, 100%. Like there's nothing, like, just to be clear. But so that's something schematically I'm always looking at with rugby is how can you take what they do from a pitch standpoint, some of the plays that they design in terms of like creating those 2-on-1s, like can I get those same patterns to develop for football? And I do think from a spacing standpoint, it's really, really interesting. Now with rugby, because everyone touches the ball all the time, it's easier to get to some of those laterals. Like in football, it takes a lot of time, a lot of sweat equity. There's a lot of sweat equity to get there, but those are definitely some things that I've taken from rugby in terms of training.
It's funny too because rugby, it's part of the game. Football, everyone is super risk averse. Like football coaches are incredibly conservative when it comes to putting the ball in the air. And so we want the short passing game. This is why we run the football, because the risk level is theoretically a lot lower. And so the idea that we're going to pitch the ball all over the place feels like it would just give most coaches in the NFL or at all levels of football a heart attack. But there probably is opportunity there.
It gives me anxiety, but I think also just like in terms of just even a simpler version is just like how they get to 2-on-1s, like because they do
Yeah.
different stuff, right? They kind of have different setups to get there. And so again, like if you are running some type of RPO with a pitch element, like it doesn't always have to be like over the top, big arc. Like there could be someone coming underneath. You could have a double underneath, kind of working on the perimeter. So I think that's something that I've really looked at quite a bit, and something that you do draw inspiration from. Like when you're designing plays, you're like, oh, we could get to that. Like, and it's not, pitch, run for a touchdown. It's like just the positioning of the receiver in relation to the back. Like we can create conflict on a perimeter defender with that pattern that they've used in rugby for 50 years.
For sure. Real quick on the tush push. By the time this comes out, it may be banned. I'm actually in favor of banning it, but not for the reasons that have been stated. One, as you mentioned, it's actually not a rugby play. It is a football play, but it's a football play that's so clearly designed based off the current rules for the offense. It's just like the offense has enough rules advantages. Defensive, you can't push defensively. You're not supposed to. Offensively, you can. That seems cheap. And that to me should be the thing. And like it used to be that you couldn't push an offensive player with the ball.
Right.
And just if you reinstitute that, then it's fine. It's just a quarterback sneak. The Eagles will still be better at it than everyone else because Jalen Hurts still squats 600 pounds and their offensive line is great. But to me, like, stop lying about the injury stuff, which is not remotely proven out in the data. And you can always be like, look, it's not yet. All it's going to take is one catastrophic. Sure, fine. That's football. But there's clearly not an elevated risk because it's never happened. Quit calling it a rugby play because it's not. Just say it's completely unfair for the defense, and we think the offense has enough advantage, and we'd like to make the games more competitive. Just say that, and then ban it, and move on. Like, be adults about it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that you'd see after that is like if I'm not pushing the ball carrier, like I can just have those two backs push the guards. Like there's ways around the rules, you know what I mean? But like I actually like the play. I think it's well executed. I think it's a good design. I think it's annoying as heck. So stay out of 4th and short. Like that's the goal, right? If you're defensively, like let's get that done. And the fact that it's not really repeatable. Like I mean, Buffalo does a pretty good job with it. Obviously, Philly does a good job with it, but other teams have tried to do this with way less success. So obviously, there's a technical element to it that I think people often overlook. Like people have tried to do this with other teams, and it's not gone as nearly as well. So for me, like they've found a wrinkle, they've found something they're good at, they spend time, they invest time in it, and they've gotten really good at executing it. So like that is ultimately what football is. So I understand I definitely understand what you're saying. And if they got rid of it, I'm not like, oh, boo-hoo, they got rid of it. Like, fine, move on. But I do think I think there's a schematic element that's pretty fantastic. So
yeah, no, I'm not like gung-ho about it. I'm fine either way. But I think to your point, like you got to stay out of 4th and short. And also like, for as much crap as Nick Sirianni gets, and sometimes there is the question of like, what does Nick Sirianni do? The aggressiveness to just be like, I don't care if we're at our own 30. Like, we're going to get this. We're going for it.
Yes.
And like, there is call it analytics, call it whatever element of like just understanding the true risk reward ratio of that. Nick Sirianni deserves a lot of credit for that. All right. Speaking of the people that would have to stop the tush push or the quarterback sneak, we have a D-line question, Logan, from our guy Stephen Kogan, who hosted that trivia game that made us look like fools a couple of years ago.
Oh, that's right.
So hi, Stephen. We still haven't forgiven you, but that's okay because it was genuinely really, really funny. And it was for a great cause as well. And then we got a couple of draft questions. But Steven writes in, hey, Craig, here's a D-line question. Well, everyone assumes the Commanders will probably get an edge rusher in the 1st or 2nd round or even a good vet in the post-draft free agency. What if they don't? In that scenario, who do you and Logan think would be their D-line in most pass rush situations, mainly who'd be the edge rushers? I currently don't see an obvious choice, but I'd like to hear which guys you think they'd play. My guess, Dorrance Armstrong, Duran Payne, or Javon Kinlaw, Johnny Newton, Dietrich Wise, or Jacob Martin. It's not awful, but I think everyone would prefer to see more juice on the edge, and I think most analysts felt edge rusher wasn't Luvu's strength. Thanks, Stephen. Pass rush, key 3rd down, Logan. Who you throwing out there?
Yeah, so I think Dorrance Armstrong did a really nice job with that last year when he was healthy. I think Jazan is a guy that I think you want to get on the field. I think Kinlaw, again, like we talked about him quite a bit, and Duran. So you have 3 guys on the interior. Maybe you bump one of them to the perimeter. And people say, oh, like you lose some of the pass rush juice. But I will say there are power rushers that do a great job collapsing the pocket that are disruptive to the quarterback. And I think it's important to remember that tackles do so much, like offensive tackles in the NFL do so much specific prep for edge rushers. They look at hand placement, they look at all this stuff, and they're not used to always kind of dealing with bigger body edge rushers. And so I do think there was times last year where like Holmes, for example, on the perimeter, who's like a 285-pound guy, like he wouldn't get a clean, quick win, but he's creating a compression of the pocket in a way that I think is pretty nice. So there's that. And I also think, don't forget about Jean-Baptiste, man. I think when he had his opportunities to rush the passer last year, showed tremendous length, showed tremendous power, and again, was able to compress the pocket in a nice way. So I think people think, oh, it's got to look like TJ Watt, or it's got to look like, Crosby, from Las Vegas. And obviously those guys are extremely dynamic, but I also think there's, like when I watch Pittsburgh, for example, like they do a great job. Obviously TJ Watt is special, but the other guys do a great job of rushing as a unit, and they compress the pocket in a nice way and create tons of pressure that doesn't necessarily show up on the sheet, but it does affect the quarterback. So I think like that's something to think about here too. And also I do think Jacob Martin, having played with him, is a guy that does have some pass rush ability, and obviously he's got to make the team. But that's kind of what I would think about, is like, obviously there's the traditional way of thinking about it where we get two kind of juiced up pass rush ends. Also, we could say, hey, let's go big, compress this pocket, work blitzes, work our middle linebackers rushing. I thought Bobby Wagner did a great job of that last year. I thought Frankie Louvu did a great job of that last year, and we're very productive. And so that's maybe the way, if they don't draft a juiced up pass rusher at 29 or 61, that's probably the direction I would lean in terms of this conversation.
I want to see what version of Javon Kinlaw we get. And when I say what version, this is not me pretending like Javon Kinlaw has at some point in his career thus far been an unbelievable, outstanding pass rusher, football player, like people thought he was going to be coming out of South Carolina. This is going back to something that Adam Peters said yesterday, where he goes, I've seen Kinlaw as low as 275 when he was in San Francisco, and he played at like 350 last year. I've seen him, in San Francisco, he was up as high as 330 at times. And to use Adam's words, quote unquote, he can be chiseled at all of those weights. Like he's just a freak athlete who is very, very capable of changing his body in whatever way he's asked to. And he's like freakishly strong, really quick. Again, some of the discipline and the rush lanes and things like that at times have gotten him in trouble. But if we're talking about him purely as a pass rusher, like where do they decide is optimal for him? Is he going to be playing at 315? Is he going to be playing at 290? And like why? And what does that mean for him in terms of rushing inside versus outside versus, whatever else? So I think getting Kinlaw out there is a good idea, but I'm also not blind to who he has been so far in his career, where I'd probably say like Newton and Payne deserve to be out there on the inside based off of that. But if we get a new juiced up version of Javon Kinlaw this year, I could certainly make that argument. I think Dorrance is the no-brainer, obviously, on the outside, on one side. And then, I'm very curious to see how they rotate Jacob Martin, Frankie Louvu, et cetera. But if I'm at the, I don't know, if the opponent's at the plus 29 and I'm like, I need a sack to get us out of field goal range, I'm probably bringing a blitz, because that is probably the best way to generate an actual sack type of pressure versus what you're talking about, which is also very effective of like, hey, we don't have that guy that's just going to go necessarily win one-on-one guaranteed if you give him 3 seconds. Let's compress the pocket and see what good things can happen. See if we can force an errant throw, whatever, and just get off the field, or at least force a quick throw that we can rally and tackle. If I need a sack, I'm having Frankie and Bobby come on some kind of cross dog something and trying to get Frankie to time that sucker up. Bobby was awesome last year as a blitzer as well. I think there was some stat. They were the only two off-ball linebackers or the Commanders were the only team that had two off-ball linebackers with 20-plus pressures, I think was the stat. So that's how I'm generating pressure as of right now if they don't have anybody else.
Yeah, and I do think like one of the things about that pocket compression that I find really interesting is I think when you watch Kinlaw last year, when you watch him rush, man, like, and again, he's not a perfect player by any stretch of the imagination, but when you watch him like turn it on, bring the book, like there are very few people that can physically match him. So the idea of like putting him on the edge and just being like, hey man, like go jack this tackle's, like go end this tackle's life real quick is a relatively appealing proposition to me, to see what that looks like at 315 or 320. And like, again, like last year, there's times where you watch you're watching the best version of what he can be. And you just see him kind of ragdoll these players, ragdoll guards, ragdoll tackles. And it's like, if you can kind of find a way to unlock that, just be like, hey man, We're not thinking about anything on third down. Like, I just want you
Right.
running right down. I want you running down this dude's face. Like, when
See if
you
you can
see,
run through the tackle and get to the quarterback.
yes, like that's like when I watch his clips, like I'm like, no one can stop this. Like no one can if he's locked in on this technique, no one can stop this type of physicality. And so that to me is also very appealing. And I know obviously like this is like kind of where we're not in an ideal world from a personnel standpoint. We're moving people around the front and blah 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 blah. But I do think like when I hear Adam Peters talk about him and when you watch the film supports it,
Yeah.
the high points of the film again, he's like a yellow player throughout his PFF grade. So, but when you watch the tackles for loss, the sacks, they're dominant physical wins. There's a physicality to them that is very unique. And so, to me, like one of the things that's so interesting about the player is like if you can get that to unlock in these pass rushing situations, like that's going to be really. I think about like Montez Sweat in pass rushing situations, a guy that could just because of his length and size and physicality could just consistently compress the pocket. And I think you get someone who's a little bit more like twitched up in the hips, like from an explosive kind of throw jump kind of standpoint than Montez. And that's an intriguing proposition to me, coupled with the things we just talked about. So again, I'm not saying he's the solution, but that marriage of the front with Duran and running games with Duran and Kinlaw, like just violence over there. And Jerzon, the way he was playing with his hands at the end of the year, it doesn't seem like it's as necessary, especially because of the linebacker pressure too. So again, I'm kind of talking myself into this, but I do see a world where you feel very comfortable with that. And again, you need to get the best version of Kinlaw to make that go. But I think if anybody in the NFL can do it, it's this staff.
Yeah.
And I just trust what they can get done with him. So
No, I feel good about that. I also, you got to get better on first and second down so you can be in those third and long situations.
Sure.
And that seems like the bigger concern right now. But a guy like Dietrich Wise, who we didn't really mention there from pass rush juice, like he's going to help in those situations, and we'll see what Johnny is in year 2, et cetera, et cetera. Take Command Podcast, Logan Paulsen there, Craig Hoffman here. A couple of draft questions, some specific to the Commanders, and then one off the wall question to wrap us up, Logan, that you got on Instagram, but I really like it. First of all, this one comes in via email from Derek. Again, if you want to get your questions in, you can hit either of us on Instagram, Hoffman.sports for me, Logan_Paulsen82 for him, or you can go to hoffmanshow.com and use the contact link to send in your questions that way, like Derek did. First off, I love your segments with Logan where you drill down on NFL subjects. You all are my favorite podcast to listen to. I'm late to the game on the podcast, but still. Thanks, Derek. Welcome to the show. Here's the question. Everyone seems to be setting the table draft-wise for the Commanders to emphasize defense this year, but I see real need still at wide receiver for a larger framed wide receiver 2 and a running back for a true 3-down threat with home run speed. My question is, what are the odds that if Jaden Higgins and or Travion Henderson, for example, are available at the same time as maybe Landon Jackson or Azariah Thomas, that the Commanders don't just double down on strengthening their offense instead? I know that even considering their free agent moves, that pass rush is still a need and their DB depth needs restocking, but just curious if you think they might throw everyone a curveball and go in a different direction than what's expected. Thanks, Derek.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a really interesting kind of team building approach. And what I would say to start it off, we're going to answer this in more detail, but what I would say to start it off is go best player available. So
Right.
if Higgins is your number 1 player on the board at that point, go that direction. If Landon Jackson is your number 1 player on the board at that point, go Landon Jackson. If Azariah Thomas is number 1, go number 1. And so that's kind of what I'd point to there. And that's what I think we try to do that every time we do a mock draft, but I just wanted to get that cleared up. So,
but there's also the reality that like you might have all those players in the same tier bucket, and then
Yes.
you've made like they will have made the decision prior who is the number 1 based off of their positional need or the fit or whatever. But I guess that's kind of at the core of the question is like, let's say those guys are all raw score, tier wise the same. How are they probably thinking about elevating one or more of those players above the others because of either positional need and or fit?
Yeah, so I think Jaden Higgins is an interesting guy. He's interesting, really, really interesting, especially kind of for the big body, because there's not a lot of those guys in this class. There's Alec Ayumanor from Stanford, obviously, who's kind of another guy in that bucket. But I do think Higgins, to me, I have a higher grade on him personally, because I think he's kind of got this slinky movement skill. He tested way better than everybody thought. And so I think people naturally say, oh, well, he's going to just project easily to outside, but he didn't really do that a ton. He did play outside for sure, but he played a lot in the slot. He kind of played in the same utilization as like Drake London, but he's not quite as physical as Drake London. So I think people hear that and they say, oh, he's going to for sure be an outside guy. And I think you want to give him a shot as an outside guy, as a true Z. And I think he catches the football well. I think he's got good route running nuance. I think he's got good release package. He's a good football player. And I think him in this offense would be really enticing to me, right? Because again, like now you are the teeth of this group is just tremendous. It's already starting to form like real offensive potency, right? You got Terry, you got Debo, you got the guy that they just signed from Dallas, and again, we don't know what he's at, but like
Gallup,
you re-signed Noah Brown. Like there's some stuff here that you feel really good about. So throwing Higgins back into that mix again, I don't know that it's necessary, but I think he because of how interesting the prospect is. I think that might be the move. The running back thing, I've heard that a bunch of times. I'm a little bit less in on, right? So like with Higgins, for example, there's a couple other big body guys later, like Dante Thornton from Tennessee, who's kind of this speed merchant vertical guy, who again, you probably get him in the fourth or fifth round. Then you've got like Naor from Nebraska, who had like a 10 RAS. He's got 34-inch arms. He's one of the freakier receivers I've seen in a long time. He's just a freak, right? Doesn't always catch the ball well, but like freak athlete later in the draft. So my point with bringing that up is that like for big body receiver, Higgins is like probably the number one guy outside of Ted McMillan from Arizona. With the running back, it becomes really interesting because I do think
there's a million of them.
There's other playmakers, right? There's other playmakers at the position that probably fit what you're looking for a little bit more specifically. And so in a draft where you only have 5 picks, you have to be very selective, right? And again, running back is valuable. We've seen how valuable running back can be. The Saquon, the Gibbs, the Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey. They do, Derrick Henry. They do add value to your offense. But I'm also acutely aware that like that guy has to be extremely special. And I look at other running backs in this class, and I'm like, the difference between Henderson and them is significant because I think Henderson will be a second-round player. But I look at like Rashard Smith from SMU. He's a converted wideout. He's explosive, man. He would make this offense tremendously explosive. And I think he's probably going to be there when you're picking in the, what do they have a fourth and a sixth and a seventh, for sure in the fourth, maybe in the 6th round. And think about like adding that playmaker to this offense. I mean, it seems like very impressive. So the back to me is a little bit less. I'm a little bit less on board with that because the position is so deep this year. The big receiver thing, like I just talked about, there's not that many big body dudes. So if that's something they want to prioritize, I'd probably go that direction. And then defense, I think, is really interesting. That perspective. He mentioned Azrae Thomas, who I love. I love the film of, but he just ran like a 4.65 at his pro day. So does he fit your minimum thresholds anymore? I don't know. Is he moving to safety? I don't know. Is he a good football player on tape? Yes, but those things do factor into decisions for teams. As I've said a million times on this show, I love Landon Jackson. He's one of my favorite players in this draft class, but he's not like a juiced up pass rusher. Like he's not going to ever have 10 sacks, I don't think, in his whole career. He's going to play super hard. He's going to be your commander's commander for 10 years. Like I'm very confident. He just plays like an absolute lunatic. But if you don't value that as much as you value the big body receiver, I think in this conversation, like you could easily go that way, right?
Yeah. So in short, yeah, I could see it happening. If you think that the receiver, especially, or like let's say a tight end drops, or there's an offensive lineman that you're like, I can't believe this guy's here. Could they absolutely double down on offense? Yeah, I think that they will truly follow their board because I think what they've done in free agency is set themselves up to do so. Like Landon Jackson at 60, whatever, like I'm fine with that. Like, hell yeah. That's a guy that some people might consider for them at 29. Like if he somehow is still there at the end of the second, then that's great. And that's where I think that I'm at with all of this is like, it truly is going to come down to, do you think one of these guys has a chance to be special or is significantly better than everyone else? If they're all kind of even, I probably favor defense ever so slightly, but it also depends on the drop off on the board of, okay, who's the next best running back and what will be available to me in 2 rounds? Who's the next best corner? Who's the next best whatever? And if there's a huge drop off and you feel like we're hitting a talent cliff at a certain position that we would like to address, then I'd probably taken that guy at that position. And my board would be set up accordingly.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up because, like, for example, like edge rusher with Landon Jackson. Like, you don't have a third round pick. So in my mind, I'm like, oh, you could pick David Walker or Stewart from Michigan, or, one of these kind of smaller, juiced up pass rushers that, have some issues from a measurement standpoint, but are going to be productive football players. But I'm like, man, you're not picking again in the fourth round.
Yeah.
So like, you do have to be a little, because I do think there's going to be like kind of the end of the first, top of the second, a run on edge rushers. And I think kind of in the third round, all those other guys will probably get picked up. So if you're going to hit this kind of space where you're not going to be able to make a pick for a while, I do think that you got to kind of pull the trigger maybe on edge. Because I do, like I said, there are receivers that I think aren't going to give you the upside of Higgins. And I do think Higgins could be special. So that's why this is a little bit tough to kind of go apples to apples here, because I don't think he'll be there at 60, for example. I think he's getting to a point now in terms of pre-draft hype where he might be in the conversation as a first round pick, maybe not for the Commanders, but that's kind of the range we're talking about, like end of first, top of second type of area. So It doesn't feel like we're quite comparing them correctly. But to your point, like, I do think there are a lot of receivers. I think there's a lot of receivers in free agency. I think there's a lot of receivers that kind of fit specific needs in the draft. There's a lot of speed receivers that you're going to be able to get later. I mentioned Daquan Thornton, but there's also Lane from Virginia Tech, who's a really solid player. So like, to me, like, the edge thing becomes a little bit more interesting because of the parameters you just laid out. Because I don't know if you're picking in the fourth round, there's going to be someone that you're like, oh, this is a difference maker at edge. Like, that's where I would say maybe you go Landon Jackson in this specific scenario.
For sure. Yeah, the Thornton kid is someone I would definitely draft in Madden. I'm like, oh, his speed's 99? I know what route to send him on. Go route. Sick. Congrats, he just broke the touchdown record. All right, speaking of fast receivers, this question from Don was interesting, Logan. Kind of a football theology question, but also one that becomes reality to an extent for the Commanders. If the Giants draft Travis Hunter at 3, and considering they now have Neighbors and Russell Moonball Wilson, that was Don's words, not mine, is that better defended with a corner at 29 or an edge player? Best, Don.
So it's a good question. And so what I would say is I'm not sure Travis Hunter's skill set would be maximized by Russell Wilson. And so what I'll say is that I don't think Travis Hunter is going to run a 40 in the pre-draft process. That's just what my gut's telling me, because I don't think he's that fast. He's very good. So don't, like, everyone's freaking out now. But he's not Malik Neighbors 4.3 burner, right. Brian Thomas Jr. 4.3. He's awesome, but his skill set is different. Yeah, so I think, again, like this, I kind of like reject the premise of the question slightly, because I don't know if that's what he's going to be good at, right? You want to get him on like bubble screens and slants, and his ball skills are excellent. And he tracks the football well in the air, but I don't think he's going to like separate the way that Malik Neighbors can separate down the field. Now, in answer to the original question, like, which better, corner or defensive line? I always think if you can get a dog on the defensive line, it makes everything better for your defense. Like, and that's where I would probably go. Like, if there is like Donovan Ezuraku at 29 is so, I know everyone's talking about him getting mocked there, but he's so interesting to me. The more research I do about the player, like not even watching film, just like looking at how he tested and how he measured, he had like 16 and a half sacks. He had the most pressures in college football. So great feel. He can rush from multiple spots. He also had he had the fastest 3-cone for a defensive lineman at the combine. And so usually if that thing's sub 7, like in that 6.9 range, like you're a very good pass rusher, right? Mike Green had a 6.86 at his pro day. So like, that's what we're talking about. And Mike Green led the nation in sacks, right? So I would say, like, if one of those guys is there that could really be a difference maker, that you think and believe can be a difference maker as a pass rusher, that's going to make it really hard for Russell Wilson, who holds the heck out of the football, to push that football down the field. And I think it just makes everybody better. And it's just about who do you think is going to be, is the edge rusher enough of a difference maker? Like we talked about, Landon Jackson, who I love, Nick Scorton, who I love. I love them as football players and I want them on my team. I don't know if they make the pass rushing difference that those other guys make. And so if that's the case, if it's the decision between a Nick Scorton and a Landon Jackson, who I would absolutely die if they were Washington Commanders. Like, I just love how they play. I would probably go like Siobhan Ravel or another cornerback in this scenario, because again, it's got to be a difference making kind of edge rusher from a pass rush standpoint.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, look, the pass rusher makes your entire secondary better. a corner does too, right? Less help, whatever, if he's really that good. But at 29, I don't know if you're getting that. Frankly, I don't know that you're getting either one at 29. It is one thing that like, are the Giants going to be good this year? I don't think so. I still think that they're in deep trouble. And Russell Wilson really faded down the stretch last year with Pittsburgh. But on any given week, frankly, with him or Jameis, they could be tremendously annoying. They're going to have some game where one of those two quarterbacks is on, and they're just like throw 4 touchdown passes because they throw I mean, I honestly don't know why they went and got Russell Wilson. I mean, I guess might be a guy that they like want to have in the building. You know, Russ is an interesting character, but for 1 year, is he a guy that you want around a rookie quarterback? Because he is professional as hell. Like, gets there really early, works his butt off, the whole deal. But I'm like, hey, if I want someone to just spam Malik Neighbors and that's my offense, if I can tell Jameis, hey, Jameis, I'm never going to yell at you for throwing to number 1. Jameis is like, okay, man, I'm ready to go. And like, he would just spam Malik Neighbors all day. And like, that would be, he might throw 30 interceptions again, but he also might throw 35 touchdowns with 22 of them going to Malik Neighbors.
100%. 100%. And so
again,
like, it is a weird decision for sure.
I don't know if they're going to win, but like, they could be annoying on any given week. All right. Last but not least, speaking of Jameis, actually, this question you got from Kevin on Instagram. I actually am fascinated because I don't know the answer to this. Question for the pod. During the combine, do the prospects have their vision tested? Thinking back to Carlos Rogers and Jameis Winston, who had vision correction several years after joining the league.
Yes. So I don't know how they did it back in the day, back when Carlos Rogers was coming out. But now that medical testing is incredibly comprehensive, like it's any test you can, like CTs, MRIs, any injury they've ever had, like they see a general practitioner usually, like in terms of like, cough and all this kind of stuff, and look at the vision chart. Like, teams want to know, man. They want to know everything they can about you. And so it's, again, like, think about with things we talked about earlier, maybe last week, 2 weeks ago. It's a process of saying, like, I want to mitigate risk on an athlete, right? And one of the ways to do that is to just know everything you can about them. And that's why the combine still is a thing, in my opinion. It's not for the testing. The testing is for the TV. It's the medical and the interviews, right? And so if the medical's not got to be crazy comprehensive, right? And every team wants to do their own evaluation, but they put those guys through an absolute gauntlet of stuff. And so does every team do it? I don't know, but I'm sure a lot of teams do it now, especially kind of given these stories of like Fred Davis needing LASIK when he gets to the NFL, or you know what I'm saying? Like Carlos Rogers, same thing. So that's what I'd say is I'm sure a lot of teams do that now.
Yeah, I'm sure. And the thing is, I think they actually changed the medical testing like 2 years ago, where it's not as much of a ringer, where it's like it used to be every team could basically do a full one.
Correct.
And you might go through like 30 tests, and it's like the same test, 30, which is ridiculous. And like, I think agents eventually were like, this is insane. Like, you guys are treating these guys like, livestock or something like that. Like, this is inhumane. And now I believe it is like a team of a couple of the team doctors get together and comprehensively do it and then disseminate the information. So it is not as much of a cattle call as it used to be. But I've no doubt that vision would be a part of it. I don't see why it wouldn't. I don't think that has changed. And then I think the question is like, what do you do with that information? And that's the same thing as a 3-cone drill. Like, oh, this guy tested a little bit lower or worse than we thought or whatever. Like, why? And what can we do about that? And the answer might be, oh, well, he's actually not as quick as we thought or whatever. But for the vision thing, if it's like on tape, like sometimes it seems like things, whatever. I don't even know what position. I mean, maybe like you have a corner who seems to be in good position but drops the ball all the time. Does a bunch of dropped interceptions. A wide receiver whose drops are a little high. And maybe you go like, well, shoot, if we can get that guy LASIK and, the ball's not blurry coming in, then maybe we can steal ourselves a really good football player. So there's I guess positions where that probably is helpful. Like Jameis's vision wasn't the problem, LASIK wise. Jameis just sometimes doesn't see defenders, and that's something that medical technology can't fix. But I think that overall, like, you then have to figure out what you can actually do with that information. At the very least, like, good for the player to be able to presumably get paid for the surgery that will make their lives better because their vision is better if they test this out. And they might have never had their vision tested in their life before that to even know that like what they experience isn't normal.
Yeah, I think about who's the guard for Kansas City, plays right guard for them.
Trey Smith.
Trey Smith, like he had a pretty serious heart condition that a lot of teams are worried about, and he ends up falling on the board. But Kansas City took that information and they went and talked to some different specialists and talked about how to manage it with medication and practice structure and all this kind of stuff. And they did it. And it's not been an issue, and he's been an awesome player for them. So I think that's another, maybe a good example of how taking the information and applying it to the individual situation can be extremely important. So yeah, I like they put him through anything you can think of. Like I've talked to him and talked to some of the guys that have been through it, and like they put them through like they got like a screen up in front of them. I think they might use VR now, where it's like you have to track a certain number of moving objects and like indicate on where they are, and test spatial recognition and spatial awareness and object recognition and 3D space. And they do all this stuff to kind of, again, just try to tip the duck in their favor a little bit. So yeah, anything you can think of, like I'm sure NFL teams are trying it.
Some of that stuff you just mentioned is also part of the S2 test, which we haven't heard of basically since CJ Stroud's whole ordeal, which was kind of unfair because even the S2 guys were like, this is not accurate reporting. But it's funny that we haven't really heard of that since. All right, that's our show for today. Mailbag questions for next week. Send them in. Instagram at Hoffman.sports, at Logan_Paulsen82. HoffmanShow.com is where you can also submit on the contact link. HoffmanShow@gmail.com I also think works. So you can use that. I got a notification that you haven't used this email address. Is it still live? I'm like, I forgot that I had it. But there you go. If you just want to send a direct email, HoffmanShow@gmail.com is apparently an email address that I set up that you can email with your mailbag questions. That's our show Thursday. Logan, tell us about our guest on Thursday. It's someone that you've talked draft with before that you're excited to bring to the show.
Yeah, Jeremy Green is a guy that I met. We were sitting watching drills at the combine, and I was just kind of talking about his process. He watches over 500 guys with reports. He's from South Carolina. He's got a little twang to his talk, a little metaphor when he speaks, and he is a funny dude who watches a ton of football. And I always say, like, him and Fred Smoots are like they're siblings in another life, man. They are very, very funny. They watch a lot of ball, and it should be very entertaining at the least.
So we got that. Got a couple other guests coming up between now and the draft. I got some special episodes too. Logan's going to take a vacation, which I'm excited for you. Because you deserve one.
Me too.
Yes. But we're gonna have some fun guest hosts during that week, so I'm excited. They don't know about it yet, but they're not gonna have a choice. So I'm if you're someone in the Commanders media sphere and you think that it could be you, that ask is coming. So we'll do that when Logan's gone, which is next week. All of a sudden, two weeks. 2 weeks from now, and then Logan will be back in time for the draft, of course. So plenty of plans still to come. We'll also tell you our draft plans soon. So yeah, that's where we're at on this here show. Well, this here episode's over, but we'll see you guys on Thursday with Jeremy Green here on Take Command.